Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at Rock Island taking a look at a pair of small Colt percussion revolvers. This is an 1848 Baby Dragoon, and this guy is an 1849 Pocket. I think if you leave out single-action armies, the cartridge guns, I think the revolvers that a lot of people think of when they think of Colt are the big Army and Dragoon models, and maybe the Walkers. Those are the big sexy pistols that get a lot of notoriety, but those are actually not the guns that were the financial foundation of the Colt company. It was actually the little pocket models, the humble pocket pistols that were widely popular with everyday folks who wanted a revolver for self-defense, or for a variety of other things, for target shooting, for hunting, whatever, but largely self-defense that made Colt into the behemoth of a firearms company that it would become. These two models combined, and particularly the 1849, there would be more of these made than of any other Colt percussion revolver model. So, as a little bit of background here, Colt's first revolvers were what are called the Patterson models, and they're substantially different. They have no trigger guard. That's probably the most distinctive visual feature of them. And these guns were not particularly successful. In fact, they were so unsuccessful that Colt went out of business as a result of making them. He went bankrupt. And it was only the contract for the ginormous Walker horse pistols that would give Colt the capital to actually start making guns again. And he used the Walker to claw his way back into financial viability. And the Walker almost immediately transitioned into the Dragoon model of pistols. And the Dragoons were made from 1848 until 1860, but less than 21,000 of them in total. And almost simultaneous with development and sale of the 1848 Dragoons, Colt introduced a pocket revolver. And this was obviously something he knew would be, or he thought would be viable on the market, because he'd made pocket model Pattersons as well as belt and holster sized Pattersons. And what he started with was actually called the Baby Dragoon, to kind of set it in context with the full-size Dragoon models. So let's take a closer look. I'll show you the Baby Dragoon itself, and then the pocket model that it quickly evolved into, and where Colt went with those. The most fundamental thing that differentiates the pocket models from all the others is the caliber. These are all in .31 caliber for Colt and for most of the other manufacturers. A pocket model was .31, a Navy model was .36, and an Army model was .44 caliber. So everything we're looking at here today is .31 caliber. Now, the easiest way to distinguish between an 1848 pocket or Baby Dragoon and an 1849 pocket is the trigger guard. The Baby Dragoon has a square-backed trigger guard. The pocket has a rounded one, and we'll get to the pocket in a moment. Now, the first 11,000 of the Baby Dragoons were also made without a loading lever. By leaving the loading lever off, and just for comparison's sake, here's one with a loading lever. By leaving the loading lever off of this gun, you could make the whole thing a little bit lighter, but definitely less likely to snag in a pocket. There's no chance that the lever is going to come loose and flop down like this. It's just a bit more of a svelte, concealable pocket gun. Now, I should also point out that the 1848 Baby Dragoon is actually a very small production gun. It would transition very quickly to the 1849 pattern, with less than 15,000 of these made in total. So this one is serial number just 5810. So this has all of the very earliest features, which is cool. So to show you those, we have round cylinder stops. Note that, well, I'll point this out again when we move to the next model, but the gap between the cylinder and the barrel is very small here, and that's because there doesn't need to be any space given to the loading lever or the loading process. In order to load this thing, what you would do is pull out the barrel wedge right there, pull the barrel off the gun, pull the cylinder out, load the cylinder by itself, and then reassemble the gun, stuff it in your pocket, and go on your daily business. The Baby Dragoons have a different scene engraved into the cylinder than the other guns. This one's a little bit worn, a little bit difficult to see, but it's still visible there. This is called the Indian fight scene, and it's a bunch of guys on horseback kind of duking it out there. So that is for early production only. And I should also point out that all of the Baby Dragoons are 5-shot guns. So you can see that in the cylinder there. By 1850, the design was transitioning, or had transitioned, to the 1849 pocket model. And this happened, there's not a hard break in serial numbers. This happens around 12 to 14,000 in the serial numbers. You'll see both models mixed for a while, and then eventually all of the Baby Dragoons drop out, and you're left with only 1849s. So the major changes that were made here, the most distinctive one is, well, one of them is that the trigger guard has been rounded, and a loading lever has been added to the gun. Now you'll notice that these are different barrel lengths. Both of these patterns were available with a variety of barrel lengths from 3-inch up to 6-inch. One of the things that Colt did with all of their models of revolver was offer a wide variety of options, different finishes, different barrel lengths, and sometimes even more than that. Certainly if you wanted a gun custom engraved, they'd be happy to do that for you, but in general, not particularly common because, of course, that's expensive. Anyway, now this is a third variation of the gun, with the Baby Dragoon being the first variation. This is the third. There is an intermediate, which differs basically only in that it has round cylinder stops rather than rectangular. Otherwise, it follows this same pattern. And the other changes that we get for this pattern, which is, by the way, now the 1849 pocket model, for one thing, the cylinder design has changed, and we now have a scene involving a stagecoach right there. So these cylinder designs, by the way, are something that Colt did to protect his brand name and identity, because these were all engraved with a single roll stamp die, and it was an expensive thing to set up. He commissioned the artwork, had this whole scene engraved in reverse, and then made a die that would roll stamp that scene onto revolver cylinders. And that was something that the sort of the fly-by-night, couple of guys in a grungy shed sort of gun shop that was making counterfeit Colt revolvers, they weren't able to reproduce this, or at least it would be very difficult and expensive for them to reproduce it. So this was a way of identifying a true Colt gun. It's a lot more effective than just stamping your name on it. Anyone can fake that. Faking these cylinder scenes was a lot harder. Having added the loading lever here, the frame actually had to get a little bit longer, because the idea with these is that this gun is loaded with the gun completely assembled. And so you have to have enough space to put a ball or a pointed bullet in here on the bottom chamber, and then you can pour your powder in, and then you ram the bullet down. But because the ramrod's in the center, the bullet has to be able to fit inside the frame there. And if we compare this side by side with our Baby Dragoon, which didn't have a loading lever and thus didn't need that space, you can see that this has been lengthened by about 3/8 of an inch. It's actually fairly substantial. And that's just done to make it possible to load the gun. There would be a couple different styles of barrel marking used. So this guy here is our very early 1848, addressed Sam Colt, New York City, in 2 lines. Our upper gun there is basically the exact same information, although they added America to the address line, but now it's just on a single line. So there are a couple variations on that, and I won't get into every little detailed change of those. One additional change that was made was in 1860, a 6-shot 1849 pocket model was introduced. So you can see we've got a 5-shot cylinder there. We've got a 6-shot cylinder on this guy. The cylinder itself remained exactly the same size. They just spaced the chambers a little closer together, and were able to put 6 shots into the exact same size gun. So that was introduced about 1860. After that, you'll see a mixture of 5- and 6-shot models. Just to keep things a little bit confusing, there was also a small run of 1849s that were made with a 3-inch barrel and no loading lever, kind of like this, which are colloquially called the Wells Fargo model. And that was another one of an example of Colt's willingness to accommodate custom order requests. If you wanted the gun a little more snag-free, they were willing to do that with the 1849 model. One last pattern that I want to show you here is mechanically the exact same gun, but made in England. Colt had a London armory They manufactured guns for sale in London, England. Not for all that long. It didn't turn out to be as profitable and as productive an enterprise as Colt had hoped it would be. But between 1853 and 1856, the London Armory would produce about 11,000 of these Colt 1849 pocket models. And if we take a look at this one, the serial number is 8884. Or 8834. These are in their own independent serial number range, separate from the American-made guns. So if you had this serial number on a New York-made gun or on an American-made gun, it would be a Baby Dragoon. However, all of the London-made guns are actually 1849 pocket models. Naturally, you could also purchase these as cased complete sets from Colt. This is our London Armory gun here. So of course we have the pistol, but then this is a magnificent example of a cased set. So I can go through and show you everything else. First off, there are instructions for loading and cleaning the gun glued to the top of the case there. So if you want, you can pause that and read that in detail. Then we have a bunch of compartments and everything that you would need to actually shoot. So taking this lid off, we have both round ball and conical bullets. You got storage for both in there. And we have a bullet mold. Colt manufactured these. There you go, Colt's patent up there. And this is a 2-compartment mold that allows you to cast either a pointed bullet or a round ball, whichever you like. We have a screwdriver. The screwdriver tip here is for taking apart any of the screws on the gun that you need to do. And then this end is actually a wrench to take off the percussion cap nipples if you need to change those, because those are separate pieces that are just threaded in so that if they get deformed or if they get clogged and you need to clean them, you can take them out, and you do that with this tool. There is, of course, speaking of cleaning, a cleaning rod for the barrel. We have a nice small little powder flask. The idea of a flask like this is that you fill this with powder, and then in order to properly charge the pistol, this lever opens the gate in the top of the powder flask. So you put your finger over this to prevent it from coming out, turn the thing over, open the gate. That allows the stem here to fill. You then close the gate, and you now have one powder charge, which you can then dump into the chamber. This is also set up to allow several different powder charges. So if you look up close there at the front, I can put this in any one of 3 successively longer positions that allow me to pick which powder charge I want to use. If you're using a pointed bullet, you would probably have less powder because there's less space in the cylinder, that sort of thing. And then, of course, we have a space for percussion caps. And what's really cool, this still actually has some percussion caps in it. So that's everything that you need to shoot. You've got caps, powder, ball, mold, tools, and the gun. Handling these even today, it's, I think, really pretty easy to see why they were so popular. They're svelte little guns. They fit in the hand nicely. I think a lot of people today have slightly larger hands than folks typically did back in the 1850s, and this would have been even more comfortable back at that time if your hands were a little bit smaller. But even today, this is a gun that would fit nicely in the pocket, but also offer really, for the 1850s, a tremendous amount of firepower. The alternatives to guns like this were, 1 or 2 shot Derringers, boot pistols. Colt had not a monopoly, but Colt was the best pistol out there for a lot of people, and it's understandable why these were so incredibly popular. In total, Colt would manufacture more than 1/3 of these little pocket revolvers, most of them 1849s. They would be in production right up until 1873, which is when Colt started production of the 1873 single-action army, basically when they started production of new cartridge firing, self-contained cartridge center fire revolvers. So it wasn't so much that interest in the baby guns had died off at that point. It was Colt wanted to transition its customers from old school muzzle loading percussion revolvers to the new high-tech center fire cartridge guns. And so that's why they cut off manufacture and they pushed people to new models of better pistols. So as I said at the beginning, I think a lot of people may not realize that it is these pocket guns that are, by a pretty solid margin, the most popular Colt percussion revolvers across Colt's entire catalog line. It's not the big sexy army guns that actually turned Colt into the behemoth of a company that it was by 1873. It was, in fact, civilian self-defense pocket carry revolvers that did that. And I think that's pretty cool. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.